The Washington Mystics are 6-17 and have picked up all 6 wins in the last month. The next Washington Mystics beat writer, Jenn Hatfield, is here to discuss what's changed for the team in the last month, how injuries are still impacting Washington, what Stefanie Dolson has brought this season, and what's ahead for the Mystics, including who is heading to Paris for the Olympics. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, welcome. We at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats, so get that YouTube subscription up. And you can also support us by subscribing to The Next, $9 a month, $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, we'll be talking about what's changed for the Washington Mystics in the last month, how injuries are still impacting the team, what Stefanie Dolson has brought this season, and what's ahead for the Mystics, including who is heading to Paris for the Olympics. Joining me today is Jenn Hatfield, who covers the Washington Mystics for The Next. So thank you, Jenn, for joining me. For those of us who couldn't catch the Mystics last game on Wednesday at noon, what happened and how did they pull out the win against the Indiana Fever?
Yeah, happy to be back on the podcast. Thanks for having me. The Mystics had one of their better games of the season on Wednesday, beating the Indiana Fever in a camp day game at Indiana. So a nice noon tip-off, a little bit different than other games this season. But they had a great first three quarters, some of their best offense and defense that they played this season. They scored 25 points in each of the first three quarters and had only 8 turnovers in those 3 periods. And then they struggled a little bit in the fourth. It turned a blowout into a really close game at the end. But the Mystics pulled out the win for their first win over Indiana this season. Ariel Atkins was huge for the Mystics with an efficient 26 points. And the Mystics got 35 points off the bench. So all around, just a good effort minus some maybe dicey moments late in the game.
And we'll talk about injuries more in the next segment, but with fewer players available, how important has having a balanced offense like the Mystics having 5 players in double figures on Wednesday afternoon been for the team this season? It's been huge.
They've had one of the most productive benches in the WNBA all season, and they really need it. If you look up and down the roster and what happened in free agency, where Elena Deladon decided to sit out the season, they lost Natasha Cloud. They don't have one singular star that their offense is going to orbit around this year. And so they've kind of had to do it by committee where everyone's touching the ball's moving, they're not playing a lot in isolation. It's whoever is open needs to take that shot. And that's how you get 5 players in double figures. That's how you get the bench playing a lot of minutes and being productive in those minutes. So it's been a function of the Mystics style of play, and they've needed it.
And Wednesday's win was the team's 6th win on the season, and the 6th since you last joined me on the pod where we were talking about the 0-12 Mystics. What's changed for the team in that month and 2 days since you were on the pod?
A lot. A lot has changed, and I tried to break it down at the Next yesterday, so go ahead and check that out if you want to really dig into the numbers. But the big thing that stands out is the offense has gotten better. The Mystics are averaging almost 10 more points per game since they were 0-12 to start the season. That comes from a variety of improvements, just simple things like finishing layups, shooting the 3 better. But it's also, bigger picture things with some new players this year. It took the Mystics some time to gel on both ends of the court, to know each other's tendencies and to be able to play off of those, to know that Stefanie Dolson likes to hit transition threes, and so maybe wait a half a second for her to get in position at the top of the key. Point guard Julie Van Loo and Steph Dolson have talked a lot about how they were getting used to each other as pick and pop partners instead of the pick and roll game that Van Loo was perhaps a little more used to, and that's been a lethal pairing now that they've kind of figured each other out and got their timing down. So they just know each other better and can anticipate better what each other is going to do on both ends, and they're communicating a little bit better. And so the result has been better team basketball, and it's also been more efficient individual numbers as well.
And, again, we'll talk about the injuries in the next segment, but this season hasn't been smooth sailing so far. But how have the vibes been?
They've been surprisingly good. There's no finger pointing. I think I said that the last time I was on this podcast. They were not pointing fingers even when they were 0-12. They were very, locked in together in that locker room, and nothing's changed in that respect. They continue to be, all pushing in the same direction, all very team-oriented, supporting each other, that sort of thing. And that's hard to do when you're struggling through a season, and particularly now as you hit the dog days of summer and you're on the road like the Mystics were for 8 days last week. They were all, by the end of that, Dee Richards told us, the team was ready to go home. And they did get to go home, but then they had to make that quick trip to Indiana on Wednesday. So, but even through those hard times, those long road trips, she said, they still want to go out to eat together. They still want to go sit by the pool together. And they're still ready to play for and with each other.
And, what opportunities does the Olympic break provide for this team as a whole? With some players going to the Olympics, we'll get into that later. But, what opportunities lay ahead for the Mystics with a little under a month break?
Yeah, I think the big thing is they've got to get healthy. The Mystics have kind of said that some of their injured players should hopefully be ready to go early in that Olympic break. And what that'll allow them to do is work on themselves. The team can work on themselves, at least with the players who are not at the Olympics. Get all that practice time that is so rare for every team during the thick of a WNBA season. So they'll get this practice time that is not usual in a WNBA season because there is this pause for Olympic competition. And I think that's especially important for this year's team because it's such a young team. Now, the Mystics' two youngest players are also Olympians. So those two won't necessarily get the Mystics player development that this opportunity provides, but there are still young players on this team who will benefit from, the additional time to develop and work on their games with the Mystics staff. And so I think it's going to be a really important break to solidify the Mystics for the stretch run and get them prepared not only for this season but looking long term too. It's an important part of their development.
And how important is that player development in the middle of this season when, this season has been so condensed and, even for the Mystics, they were playing, I think, like 3 games in 4 days and some other crazy numbers like all teams have been doing in this condensed season.
Yeah, I think it's really important to just have players kind of go back to basics, hone their good habits. Sometimes after there haven't been a lot of practices, coaches will talk about just like making sure habits don't slip. And getting back to those basics. And so the Mystics can reinforce those things. They can have more time to be able to do maybe some development things that are a little more taxing on the body. They can get players in the weight room. So I think it's a great opportunity to kind of fill in the gaps where coaches ideally would love to work on some things during the season, but it's just they don't have enough time or it's not smart with the schedule.
And, what are you looking to see from the team as they come out of the Olympic break, if everything goes as planned and they're able to get healthy and work on themselves?
Yeah, I think the main thing is honestly, like, can they get healthy? Like that's my number one question heading into the break. But, assuming they can, I'll be very curious to just kind of see how everyone fits back together again, right? Like we've barely seen Brittany Sykes this season, and I know we'll talk about that later, but how does she fit in now that Julie Van Loo has been running the point the whole season? Sykes will still start, but how does she play off of Van Loo now, and how does she fit in with players like Steph Dolson, who she hasn't had a ton of minutes yet with, and how do the fact that the players who have been healthy have improved over the course of the season and developed that chemistry? How does that help her get back into the groove? So I'm curious to kind of see that with everybody. Shakira Austin definitely. Want to see how she kind of fits in with Aaliyah Edwards, for example. And then I'm also just curious how, kind of the Olympic experience helps the players who are Olympians come back and maybe bring something a little bit different. Maybe they got their confidence up because their team went on a run and they won a medal. maybe they were playing a little bit of a different role for their national team, and they can bring some of that to the Mystics too. So I'm just curious to see kind of how that all integrates with hopefully, lots more parts to choose from after the break.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll talk about how injuries are impacting the team and what Stefanie Dolson is contributing on and off the court. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode is brought to you by Apostrophe. I've struggled with self-confidence as I've been planning my wedding over the last year. I've prioritized taking care of myself and being kind to myself, and over time have grown to love myself more than I have in years. One of the biggest things that can lead to a lack of self-confidence is your skin, and that's why we're excited to partner with Apostrophe, the sponsor of this episode. Just fill out an online consultation about your skin goals and medical history, take a few selfies, and a dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan for you. Apostrophe offers access to prescription treatments for all types of acne. I love that there's no in-person appointment or trip to the pharmacy needed. We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon when you use our code LOCKEDON. That's a savings of $15. This code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/lockedon and click Get Started. Then use our code LOCKEDON at sign up and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this episode. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So one thing that unfortunately hasn't changed for the team is injuries, and I feel like we are unfortunately talking about injuries every time I have you on this podcast. But can you provide an injury update on Shakira Austin, Brittany Sykes, and Carly Samuelson?
Yep, can do. So that's 3 starters out for the Mystics right now. If you're keeping count at home, it was actually 4 at one point last week when Stefanie Dolson was 6. So I guess there's some progress, but. Sykes and Samuelson are out until the Olympic break. Sykes is out with a foot injury after she had an ankle injury earlier in the season, came back for all of about 3 quarters and then hurt her foot. So that's been really unfortunate for her. And then Samuelson has a broken finger. And, with both of them, it was, maybe if there wasn't an Olympic break, they could have come back, right before what is now the Olympic break. But with the schedule the way it is, it kind of made sense to just, let that ride its way out until the Olympic break and make sure they're fully healthy and reintegrate them during the break. And then Shakira Austin, she had off-season hip surgery and she came back at the beginning of the season, but she suffered a hard fall against the New York Liberty on May 31st. And the Mystics are just trying to, find some consistency with her. She'll have good days, she'll have bad days. And they were hoping for a little bit more of a linear recovery. So they're being really cautious with her. They just want to get her to a place where she feels good with her body, every day and is able to do whatever she wants to do without any discomfort. So there's no timetable on her. And we'll keep sharing information as we get it on that one, but not a lot of details there, unfortunately.
And who has stepped up for the Mystics amid all of these injuries?
Yeah, actually, a lot of players have, as I kind of mentioned in the last segment with the bench. But, among that bench group, Shatori Walker-Kimbrough has been great in her last several games, really stepped up her scoring, has been notably aggressive, getting to the rim and shooting threes. Maisha Hines-Allen has moved from a reserve role into the starting lineup and has kind of flourished in more minutes. Fun fact, she and Steph Dolson are 2 of 6 WNBA players right now who are shooting both 50% from the field and 40% from 3 on a certain number of minimum attempts. So that's just a crazy level of efficiency for those 2. As I mentioned, Steph Dolson has stepped up. She's been shooting well all season, but particularly in the past month. Emily Engsler's gotten more minutes in the front court. That's a young player who could really, benefit from that player development time during the break, especially since she hasn't, had the most stable WNBA career. This could be a great opportunity for her. And then Ariel Atkins, has really settled in as the leader of this group. She's one of those players who needed a little bit to get used to her new teammates and figure out kind of where the seams are. In opposing defenses with the group that's around her. It's a little bit different than groups that she's played with in the past, but lately she's been scoring more and scoring really efficiently, especially we just saw in the game against Indiana. So she's kind of really been, elevating the team in all ways lately.
And you wrote about Steph Dolson last week, which listeners, if you haven't read that already, make sure you go and do that. But this is the second stint in DC for Dolson, and what impact is she making on and off the court?
Yeah, she's been huge. I think she's played a bigger role than anyone really anticipated, partly with the injuries and partly just because she's been phenomenal. She's the oldest player on the team right now, so she's a veteran, she's a leader. Teammates talk about how she's really seen it all. She's won a WNBA title. She's been on Mystics teams in the past who've missed the playoffs. She won a championship in college. So she really has experience in every scenario and can be really level-headed for the team no matter what they're going through. But, on the court, in terms of her production, she's the second leading scorer among Mystics players who have appeared in at least 10 games, which, again, I don't think that was necessarily expected of her at the beginning of the year. But she's really stepped up. Her three-point shooting has been super efficient. I know we're going to talk about that, but that just opens up the offense so much for everyone else when your center is shooting threes at such a ridiculous clip and pulling opposing bigs out of the paint and making them stay there.
Yeah, so can you tell me more about her three-point shooting this year? In the story, you've talked about it a lot, but just some wild statistics for Steph Dolson that you don't really see from a center.
Yeah, she's having a historic season, and a lot of people say things are historic lately. This is like incredible. She's, as of right now, through Wednesday's game against Indiana, she's shooting an even 50% from 3, 47 of 94 attempts. And so if you do the math there, that's not a low number of attempts. That's 4.3 attempts per game, which the fact that she's hitting 50% of those is wild. She's making them off catch and shoot opportunities. She's doing pick and pops with mostly Julie Van Loo, like I talked about. She's hitting them as the trail player in transition. She's been super efficient from there, and it's really given the offense a jolt, given her teammates a jolt. They've even like about a month ago they were joking with her by shouting out her percentage in practice because it was so unbelievably high. And she had to put a stop to that after one slightly down game by her standards. But, it might pop up again if she keeps doing this.
And, how has her veteran leadership helped the team this year?
Yeah, just in the locker room, she's so willing to say things. And that doesn't mean she talks all the time. She's been really deliberate about balancing the need to say things with the need to shut up. She doesn't want to overtalk, but she's willing to say things that might be difficult for people to hear, and she doesn't kind of dance around it. She says what needs to be said. She, like I said, she's been in so many situations that she often just recognizes things that are going on and can bring that perspective to a relatively young team. And then we haven't talked about this yet, but she's just a really great passer, especially for a big. And so she often sees a lot of things on the court that maybe her teammates don't see. And so in practice, she can stop and point those things out. Or in a game, the way that she is able to read what's going on and make the simple pass or the simple next play to keep the offense flowing is really, really important for the team.
And coming up next, we'll chat about what's ahead for the Mystics, including who's heading to Paris. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As much as I try not to, I sometimes slip back into the habit of comparing myself to others, especially on social media. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. Therapy has been really helpful for me as I navigate all the changes life throws at me, from moving to a new state to the stress of wedding planning. I've been able to learn positive coping skills and have been empowered to continue to grow into the best version of myself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Okay, Jen, so who is heading to the Olympics from the Mystics and for what team?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of Olympians leaving DC and going to Paris. 3 players, as well as general manager Mike Thibault is going to be an assistant coach for Team USA, so a total of 4. But on the player side, we've got Aaliyah Edwards making her second Olympic appearance for Team Canada, Julie Van Loo making her second Olympic appearance for Team Belgium, and Jade Melbourne making her first Olympic appearance for Australia. So quite the cast. They'll clash a little bit in Paris, and it should be a good test for all of them.
And what are their roles expected to be?
Yeah, so all of them will have opportunities to play big minutes. Julie Van Loo is a starter for the Belgian national team. No reason to expect that she won't start again. So she'll play a lot of minutes. Aaliyah Edwards will get the chance to play a lot more than she did in her first Olympic go-round when she was the youngest player on Team Canada 3 years ago. So she'll get a chance to kind of make her stamp on the Olympic stage, I think. And then Jade, is one of the youngest ones on Team Australia. She's the youngest player in the WNBA, so that's kind of a familiar role for her. But she's created opportunities for herself on the Mystics, and she could definitely do something similar with Australia, providing literally a change of pace off the bench and just the jolt of energy like she does for the Mystics. So curious to see, how Australia head coach Sandy Brondello uses her and how she kind of fits in with the veterans on that group.
And are there any specific storylines to watch for? Should I be circling any games on my calendar?
Yeah, plenty of storylines, but I will stick to just a few on the pod. First of all, I think all 3 teams have medal potential. All our top 6 teams in the world. So, who's going to get on the podium, I think is the first kind of obvious one to watch. And for that to happen, Canada and Australia will meet in pool play. So they'll have to go through each other for that. So that's going to be a really fun matchup for Mystics fans in particular, but really just basketball fans. I think it'll be a great game. Aaliyah Edwards joked with me that she was going to tell the Canadian staff that she wanted the one-on-one matchup with Melbourne, and she was just gonna ISO that matchup. So that's a little bit of a mismatch, probably in both directions, but would love to see it. Stay tuned for if we get that at all. And then I think the other big question is how far can Belgium go? Like I said, they're a medal contender. They won Eurobasket in 2023, led by a name that will be familiar to Mystics fans, Emma Mieseman. So Mieseman is back to lead this Belgian group in the Olympics, and they've got Van Loo and Julie Allemans. So, I think that they have all the pieces, assuming that Allemans fully healthy from an injury she suffered earlier. And, they gave the Americans a big scare in Olympic qualifying in Belgium. So those two teams will have to meet again in pool play, and it'll be interesting to see, whether Belgium can kind of make up for a performance that disappointed them in the last Olympics. They were off the podium. They're eager to improve on that, and they certainly have the potential to. So I'll be watching that for sure.
Awesome. Well, I was wondering if we were going to get through that segment without you mentioning Emma Misa-Min, and I was sure you were going to mention her. But what other games do you have circled in terms of the Mystics that our listeners should also make sure that they're watching, or if you're in the DC area, attending?
Yeah, so I'll give you one before the break and one after the break. Before the break, on Tuesday, which is July 16th, the Phoenix Mercury are in town, so that means Natasha Cloud gets her first game in front of Mystics fans since leaving the team in free agency. It also means that Mercury associate head coach Kristi Tolliver makes her homecoming to the DC area for the first time. The Mystics and the Mercury have met once this season, but it was out west, so that'll be a big one. And to boot, it's camp day, so it'll be an 11:30 a.m. tip-off with all the energy from the kids in attendance at Capital One. So that should be just a super energetic, super fun game. And then looking a little further ahead, at the end of August, Friday, August 23rd, the Mystics host Los Angeles, and the Mystics announced this week that is going to be the game where they induct someone into the Mystics Hall of Fame, as they have done every year for the past few years. And this year's inductee is Elena Beard, who played for the Mystics and then for LA. So that's very fitting. And there will be a bobblehead for the first, I think it's 1,500 fans. So, a Hall of Fame induction is only made better by the presence of bobbleheads. So looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I was recently at a bobblehead game that the Connecticut Sun had, and they actually have one more coming up, and bobblehead games are just always special. I don't know what's behind it, but just always special. And, Hall of Fame induction games are some of my favorite stories from you. So before you end up working on that, what are you working on now?
Yeah, so I'll have a story out soon on the Mystics Olympians. Looking forward to getting that out. And then I'll have a story on the homecoming for Natasha Cloud and Kristi Tolliver. So really looking forward to that. And I got a couple other things in the works, and we'll have kind of a random assortment of content during the Olympic break, as is kind of my specialty. So yeah, lots in the hopper as always.
So excited for that. Well, thank you for joining me today, Jen. Where can the listeners find you online?
Yeah, so best place to find me is on Twitter or X, whatever you choose to call it. I'm at Jenn Hatfield 1. That's Jen with 2 N's. You can also find all of us at thenexthoops.com. Or our Instagram is at thenexthoops.
Awesome. Well, thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. And make sure to tune in tomorrow to hear from our WNBA draft crew.